What up, Pittsburgh Steel fans? It's your boy, Matty P, bringing to you another Steelers Mad Monday show on the Touchdown Under channel. I'm actually alone this week, not with my co-host, Marky Davison, but that's okay. Hopefully you enjoy what we've got to offer. Just a reminder as well, if you don't subscribe to us, hit the subscribe button. That's where you get all our juicy content. You can hit the bell icon. You get all the notifications. Likewise, if you just already subscribed or you're not yet ready to subscribe, if you like what we say during the show, hit the like button. If you don't like it, we'd love the comments. We're getting some really cool comments on our videos. Keep them coming. We'd love to hear from you. Look, today's show, I'm going to build off what we did on Mad Monday last week, what we did a little bit on Trudgeon and TDU on the weekend. Last week on Mad Monday, we showed sort of that depth chart. We talked about two positions of need for the Steelers, one of which is safety and strong safety. And then we sort of saw that over the weekend as well around the Terrell Edmunds situation, especially with the bargain basement deal that he went on to go to the Philadelphia Eagles. Likewise, though, we're kind of missing a third wide receiver on this roster. And so some people sort of say Steelers going to go there in the draft. I've heard everyone's pivoting now. They're thinking Steelers going to go defense. Like early on, I kind of thought that anyway, to try and get younger and cheaper at key positions. That's what they need to do because they're going to have their guys on offense slowly come up for renewal. Also, they're very high expenditure on defense now. They obviously want to lower that. That's the only way they're going to be able to bring in talent and improve. So on today's show, we're going to do two things. We're going to look at some potential strong safety free agents that are still out there in the market. And we're going to look at three, so we're going to look at 4 or 5 of those guys. And we're going to look at 3 wide receivers that I think could be really important in terms of what the Steelers need from that third wide receiver based on what's available through the free agency market. So we're going to try and crack through all of that. We'll see how we go in 20 or 30 minutes. All right. So first thing I'm going to do is, so you don't have to look at me the whole time, is we will bring up one of my favorite tools of all, my StatHead comparison tool. Now, StatHead is a paid-for thing with Pro Football Reference, so I need to do a full shout-out to them. They're not sponsors of ours. Hopefully one day they will be. But Pro Football Reference are certainly, provide some awesome stats. I prefer them over PFF. They're more trustworthy. And StatHead has some cool tools we can use. I really like the player comparison tool, particularly because I think it gives you guys a bit more of an understanding of, certainly me when I look at things, puts into context someone's production. Not just saying, oh, I like that guy. I got 5 forced fumbles last season. So the 4 players that I've got, depending on how big you can see it or how, I'll go through these as well. Plus, we've got the audio side, so you guys can't see this, obviously, because I'm showing it on YouTube. But the 5 players I looked at are guys that are in the free agency market right now in Adrian Amos, Landon Collins, Keanu Neal, Ronnie Harrison, and obviously we lost Terrell Edmunds. Now, if you look at the safety market, the reason why I picked those 5 guys is they're definitely strong safeties. They're the bigger guys. All of them are above 214 pounds or more, according to Pro Football Reference, but that's about what their weight is when I've checked up elsewhere as well. The smallest guy is Harrison from a weight perspective. Biggest guy is Amos, Collins, and Neal. Now, as you see, there's a lot of other names. There's guys like Taylor Rapp that you've probably heard about to the Steelers. I'm not sure he's the fit for the box safety they want. I'm looking at strong safeties that can come down into the box. I'm not saying Taylor Rapp's not a good pickup. I do like Taylor Rapp. He's also one of the youngest free agents on this list, along with Nasir Adderley, but I think Taylor Rapp's a better player. Also follow him on Instagram because I just like the guy. Followed him since he came out of college. He seems like a really good guy. Settled down after the Super Bowl. He got engaged. I think he's married by this stage. So, yeah, it just seems like a really cool guy. From everything that I've seen at least. But as I said, I wanted to look at guys that are plus 210 pounds. Carl Joseph's obviously around there on the list. He's a bit low. I think he's like 206, 208. Obviously, he's sort of danced around the Steelers practice squad for a few years but had injuries. So that's how I chose this, because I looked at the full safety market, but I wanted to go with strong safeties. And I tried to stick away from guys that were 32 or older as well. That was another key thing for me, because I think the Steelers want someone they can put in on a 2 or 3 deal. That's not going to happen. So that's why we picked the guys that we did. And most of these guys are under 30, I think. It's Harrison's under. Yeah. Amos is the only guy above. Collins is 29. So that's how we did it. Now, moving back to the StatHead tool. So let's look at games played overall. So Landon Collins and Adrian Amos are both started their careers in 2015. In the league, Keanu Neal 2016, and then Edmunds and Harrison in 2018. So Edmunds is here as kind of like our control if it was a science experiment. Edmunds is here so we can sort of see what the Steelers have had, what they might be missing out on. Now, obviously, Edmunds and Ronnie Harrison have played the same number of seasons. Edmunds has played about 12 more games. Keanu Neal's played 1 more seasons, played about 11 more games. Landon Collins has played 100 games. Adrian Amos is 126. Don't worry, we've got the per game totals as well. So, that'll even things out a little bit. The other thing that I think is pretty key is the AV scores. Now, obviously, AV is I talk about it a lot. If you haven't heard me talk about it, it's the approximation value score that Pro Football Reference give. That's basically a grading on a season's performance weighted against other players at the position. And then obviously this AV score is a cumulative score that these players have had over time. Now, Landon Collins and Adrian Amos obviously are going to have more than the other guys because they've been in the league a year or 1 or 3 seasons more than the other guys on the list. But what's important is that they're actually quite similar. So it gives you a good feel for where it's sort of sitting in terms of that regard. But in this instance, because I usually like to only compare people from the same years, but I wanted to look at this over the course of their career. Anyway, so obviously Adrian Amos leads in games, Landon Collins in games. Keanu Neal, he's 2 extra seasons, but only 1 more game than Terrell Edmunds. Important to note, though, Keanu Neal has had a major injury, and he also was shifted to the linebacker position, so that kind of needs to be taken into context as well in full transparency. Now, in terms of solo tackles, the most there is, Amos Collins you'd expect. Neal ahead, he would play linebacker for a little while. Assisted tackles, again, Collins, Neal are ahead there. But interesting, Terrell Edmunds comes in ahead of Amos. Now, that also relates to Adrian Amos playing on different sides of the defenses and he's played in previously. He has played a little bit of free safety or been lined up in free safety positions, even though he's probably a strong safety for most. So that's kind of interesting as well. If you look at the quarterback hits, Keanu Neal and Landon Collins are way more up there than Terrell Edmunds. Now, that could be schematic in terms of what they've done. But in terms of quarterback hits, these are the guys that got to the quarterback. And we did, Terrell Edmunds did come down in the box. Tackle for a loss, when we look at that goes to Landon Collins, who's kind of my prime target, if you can't sort of tell. I talked about him on the TDU on the weekend, really like him. But Adrian Amos is up there too, and I was surprised he was ahead of Keanu Neal. And that kind of sort of cements why he's probably going to cost a bit more than a Collins or a Neal. He's probably going to cost you the most on this list, apart from maybe Ronnie Harrison. Ronnie Harrison's a bit lower down the order as well. And he's played in a team that's had John Johnson III, a team that's had Grant Delpit, so he's struggled to take the field. I think he had a knee injury as well off the top of my head. In terms of sacks, what's interesting here is Ronnie Harrison and Terrell Edmunds are the same. Landon Collins leads. Adrian Amos is second with 6. Keanu Neal has 2.5, which is kind of interesting considering he played middle linebacker. On the forced fumble front, none for Terrell Edmunds. That's something that a lot of Steeler fans have griped with over the years on, Steeler Nation out there on social media. Keanu Neal has the most. You'd expect that with what he does, Big Bopper. Landon Collins has 7. Again, you kind of expect that. Out of all the guys on this list, they're there. I thought Ronnie Harrison would have a couple, but he didn't. I guess that's in fairness contrast to Terrell Edmunds. Didn't have any either. In terms of interceptions, that's definitely, I was surprised that Collins was ahead of Amos there, but he was. And those guys are in the double digits. Harrison and Edmunds have 5 each. And so that's kind of how it looks. Now, from a pass defense perspective, I did get those numbers. Pro Football Reference doesn't do it in this comparison tool, but I did go grab the numbers. Amos led with 48. Collins had 41. Now, again, those guys have played more in the league. Edmunds had 26. Neal had 20. Now, again, you remember Neal played some linebacker. Neal's used a lot more in that sort of linebacking, tackling, strong safety, stop the run. And then Harrison had 23, which kind of gives good context for where Edmunds sort of sat. So, again, these more experienced guys do have a bit more there in terms of production, but they've actually had more production overall than what Harrison and Edmunds and Neal have had as well, because they've only played 3 more seasons in the league. And it's not like it's double the production, but it's certainly, a good 40 to 50% more in different categories. The other thing, and I didn't do past defenses by games, I'm sorry, but if you look at the per game total for tackles, Ronnie Harrison's the worst with 2.2, Terrell Edmunds in fourth with 3.5, Keanu Neal and Adrian Amos the same, and Landon Collins with the most. Landon Collins also has the most assisted tackles. Terrell Edmunds is there in third, just behind Keanu Neal. In terms of averaging sacks, it's Terrell Edmunds, Landon Collins, Ronnie Harrison all average the same per game, which I thought was interesting. Forced fumbles, it's only Collins and Neal there. And interceptions, everyone but Neal is averaging 0.1 per game. So I guess, and you can go in and look at their coverage totals and everything like that. We could do that, but these guys are strong safeties. And so I really wanted to address it from that perspective of who are the guys that are going to come down and fill the box? Who are the guys that are going to mark up on the tight ends? Because as I said on the weekend on TDU, if you missed it, or even previously on last week's Mad Monday, the Steelers have to be able to stop a number of tight ends in the AFC. Guys like Uzama at the Jets, guys like Dawson Knox at the Bills, guys like I think Mike Gesicki left the Dolphins. But you've got guys like Travis Kelce, obviously at the Kansas City Chiefs, Mark Andrews from the Ravens. You can go around and there's a bunch of great tight ends that are playing in the AFC. And the Steelers have to be able to. Hunter Henry, even from the Patriots, I do like him. People don't think he's worse than off the Chargers, but I do like him. There's a bunch of these tight ends that they have to be able to deal with, and it's a great tight end draft. So tight ends are coming to come back in vogue in some way, shape, or form. We've got to have strong safeties that are above 6 foot. Some of these guys are 6'3" and 6'4", guys that can, big, heavy guys that can go in and knock the ball out of those guys' hands, guys that can come in and stop the run. Particularly, we don't have a Mike Hilton we can rely on anymore. So when I look at that, this is a real hole on the Steelers roster. And when you think about what Terrell Edmunds signed for, again, I want to pick up on that. On social media, we've seen the rounds of the deal, like it's barely $2 million. There's all these different types of breakdowns of the guaranteed money and how he gets that, sort of the non-guaranteed money. It's either one or two things, as most of you would probably be aware by now. It's either the Steelers didn't want to bring him back or he didn't want to go back to the Steelers. I kind of think he wanted something fresh and new. I kind of get it too. And that's why I don't close him out to a future comeback with the Steelers. He's bet on himself. But also, Philadelphia went to the Super Bowl. They're trying to get back there. They've still got a lot of that core team. Maybe he wants to go out and do that. It's not like he went to an AFC North rival. He went to Philadelphia, stays in Pennsylvania, goes to the NFC. Interesting is both Edmunds brothers in Tremaine and Terrell and moved from AFC to NFC. But I wish him well in his career. I thought Steelers fans gave too much hatred toward him. He did perform at like an average of like 5.8 AV, which is higher than the average of 5.55 for all safeties drafted 2012 to 2019. So honestly, I think he was a much better player than what a lot of people give him credit for. And even when you look at these guys here, all drafted in that era, if you look at the averages here, these guys are all around that 5 or less. Like Ronnie Harrison, he's under 5 per. Keanu Neal, under 5 per. Adrian Amos, 5, 6, 7. So he's got 7 seasons at 44, so he'd be ahead. There he'd be at 6, so he'd be ahead of the AV. So would Collins. But that shows you, even in this list, Edmunds is like the 3rd ranked strong safety, and look how cheap he's been. But look, you can't pay everyone. That's the thing. You can't pay everyone yet. They haven't done things like cut Gunner O and what have you. Cool. So that's going to knock through the strong safety side of the show. We're now going to move on to the wide receivers. So obviously, I pull up this list in front of you. You can see Miles Boykin right there. Miles Boykin is probably the name of the Steelers wide receivers last year that I think a lot of people would be keen to bring back. Obviously, he does things on special teams, plays gunner, etc. Why am I focusing on wide receiver? As I said at the start of the show, the Steelers right now in their wide receiver room, or I alluded to anyway, have Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, Anthony Miller, Calvin Austin, who we haven't seen much out of yet, Gunner O, I think Cody White's on one of those futures contracts, and they've got other guys that are not necessarily realistic shots at the 6, or 5 or 6 guys on the depth chart. Now, when you think about that, we don't know what Austin can be. He's been injured. We do not know. He is an unknown. Anthony Miller is a slot wide receiver who did okay in Chicago, and I don't think it's really been given a full chance. But again, we don't quite know. Yeah, we can go and draft a wide receiver and Steelers have got a good pedigree in doing that. But what happens if a Pickens or a Deontay Johnson goes down? None of the guys, or even if you bring back Boykin, which I won't mind bringing back Boykin, none of those guys are there to be a decent 3 or 2. Now, the guys that I've picked to compare, you might sit there and say, I don't believe 1 or 2 of those guys are a decent 2. But they're better. They're kind of the guys that I think feel the need. Like I picked with safety, and I went after the strong safety position because the Steelers have a free safety. He's called Minka Fitzpatrick, number 39. Yeah, and he does play free safety more than anything else. I went for a bigger wide receiver because we got the slot guys. We got Deontay, and there's guys here like Scotty Miller on this list that I think could be interesting to bring in a speed guy or a Dante Pettis or Cole Beasley or the Richie James. There's those lots of fast guys. But you can get them late in the draft as well. And we've got that. I hope we've got that guy in Calvin Austin. I wanted a big wide receiver plus 6 foot, a guy that can go out and get the football, a guy that means that Pickens doesn't have to play on the outside. They can move Pickens around. The ability to move Pickens around, I think, is crucial for this offense and Kenny Pickett and the development of George Pickens, particularly with some of the schemes they could do with him in the slot and being, and having him doubling up, having on him slot, like line up in a slot on one side, have Freemuth go down a seam route on the other side. The Steelers could get quite creative in what they want to do there. So I've gone bigger wide receivers. The 3 guys I've gone after on this list are going to be Laquan Treadwell. Kenny Golladay obviously signed that massive deal leading the Lions for the Giants and never really amounted to different things with different injuries. He's drafted by the Lions, and Rashad Higgins as well. Now he's 6'1", so he's smaller than Laquan Treadwell's 6'2", and obviously the 6'4" for Kenny Golladay. They're all over. Apart from Rashad Higgins, they're all over. The other 2 guys are over 210 pounds. But I like what Rashad Higgins can do and go up and get the football. That's why I looked at him, and I think he knows AFC North, having played for the Browns as well. Now, again, I should have said this for the safeties. If my show goes to air and any of these guys have been signed, I do apologize. I go over the cap because until they've got the numbers, I don't trust it. Spot Track has gotten things, or Spot Rack, whichever one is, has gotten things wrong in the past. They're usually pretty good, and they're good on some of the specifics of a contract deal. But over the cap only does it when they see kind of basically paperwork filed with the NFL or enough of the evidence has gone through. They're not trying to jump on it the quickest. They're trying to be accurate. And that's why I trust them. That's why you'll see me use them on the show. And obviously a paid subscriber with them too. Now, Laquan Treadwell, and we'll compare all the stats for the guys in a moment. But Laquan Treadwell basically last year played on a $1 million base salary deal. So he's going to be pretty bargain basement. He was drafted by the Vikings, played for the Falcons, Jaguars, Patriots, Cardinals, and latest the Seahawks. He's been on and off practice squads, as you can see here. And he's kind of a guy that, like some people said, he's too big to be a running back in terms of height. Could he be an H-back? If you're out there in Madden, there's previous editions, I've turned him into a tight end and he scored a bunch of touchdowns, just because of what he can do in the release that he's got. That's like a Madden trick. That's not necessarily what happens in real life. But he is a big guy. And if you think about how Laviska Shenault can be used, Laquan Treadwell's kind of in the same boat there if you really want to. Kenny Golladay, as you can see, if you look at his contract history, Lions, Giants, he's pretty much only played for those 2 teams. Got a massive deal with the Giants at 20 average per. It's never really turned out for him, particularly when you look at like his statistics over the last couple of years, barely, not even 5 TDs. He's had 1 TD since departing. He has had that injury cloud as well with him. And then Rashad Higgins over the last couple of years, so he's played with the Browns and the Panthers. From his perspective, touchdowns, he's only had like 1 in the last couple of years. So you're probably sitting there going, Matt, how are any of these guys going to fill the role? As I'm saying, these are guys that I'm open to bringing in because of the price they will be. Now, Kenny Golladay obviously is probably going to cost you a little bit, even though he hasn't done anything. But maybe you sign him on an incentive laden deal. Maybe he'll take $4 million, $4 or $5 million, because I don't see anyone sitting there offering big money for him as I go to air with this show. So let's compare them. Now, I found this kind of funny. Definitely, there's obviously a bit of difference in their AV score. And you kind of expect that with a Kenny Golladay and what he did at the Lions with Matt Stafford. and versus what the sort of quarterbacking that Rashad Higgins has had to have at the Browns. Obviously, there's been a couple of okay seasons from Baker. And then Laquan Treadwell's bounced around in the league. So it's about, does he fit into the scheme? Is he on and off a practice squad? Obviously, his AV is going to be lower straight out because the production's just not the same. But I was surprised at how close the number of games were that they've played. Now, Kenny Golladay was actually younger than the other two guys. I found that, I was surprised at that. I thought he was the same year or a year ahead of them. But he isn't. He actually came into the league in 2017 versus Higgins and Treadwell in 2016. He's also played the least amount of games, but he'll have the most production. So that's kind of interesting to think about as well. When you look at rushing, none of these guys are big rushers. So even Laquan Treadwell has not been used like that, even though he's got more of a body type like Laviska Shenault. In terms of receptions, Kenny Golladay's got the most. That's probably no surprise to any listener of this podcast right now. Higgins and Treadwell are a lot closer than I thought they would be, though. I thought Higgins would have more. Now, the yardage is where it really starts to separate, and same in touchdowns. Again, you kind of expect Treadwell to be the lowest on the list. I didn't expect Higgins to be so far ahead of him. So Kenny Golladay's first with almost 4,000 yards, 3,670. Rashad Higgins with 1,890. Laquan Treadwell with 1,226. Touchdowns, 22 for Kenny Golladay. Rashad Higgins, 12. Laquan Treadwell, 5. Yards per reception in the NFL, 16.2 for Kenny Golladay. Massive target of Matt Stafford's in some of those games, particularly after he lost. He never really had anyone that got to replace Calvin Johnson. So, Kenny Golladay was like the closest thing he kind of had since then. But 16.2 yards of reception for Kenny Golladay, 13.8 for Rashad Higgins, and 11.1 for Laquan Treadwell. Long, again, you'd expect that to be the highest with Kenny Golladay, just given the quarterbacking he had with Matt Stafford there. Now, per game, I kind of found interesting. Again, remember, Kenny Golladay has played 1 year less, but it doesn't matter because we've got these per game totals. Receptions, he averages 3.1 versus Higgins and Treadwell's 1.6 and 1.4. He also averages 50 yards a game versus Higgins is 22, Laquan Treadwell's 16, and he averages 0.3 touchdowns a game. That's kind of big. So I guess when you look at them, in terms of playoffs as well, you can look at that. Laquan Treadwell's played in 4 games, interestingly, but not really had any production. Higgins has played in 2 and had production. That would have been against the Steelers as well. Yeah, he had a decent game against the Steelers that week. I might pull that up, what that yardage was. In my head, it was like 79 yards, but I couldn't say that for sure. Obviously, Kenny Golladay playing with the Lions and then the Giants when he did, that's not the case. Let's go to playoffs for Higgins. Rashad Higgins, advanced playoffs. 2 games. They didn't break it out. 2020. Yeah, that's going to be really hard for me to go and pull. Or maybe I can go to 2020 week summaries. Wildcard playoff. That would have been against the Steelers. Yeah, and then let's go. Juju had most that week. Higgins is not on that list. What did he get? What did Higgins get? In my head, it's going to be 79 yards. So it's going to be interesting to see what we can pull. Oh, wow. Okay. It's not going to pull it for us. Interesting. Anyway, so I think when you really look at it, these 3 guys, as I said, they're guys that, I think Laquan Treadwell will be a bit more of a leap of faith, but he's cheaper. It's going to cost you a vet minimum. He's a guy that you kind of feel comfortable. If they're really happy with Austin, you bring him in, you bring him big, like some size. Maybe you just bring back Boykin instead of him and you trust that. And I probably should have thrown Boykin into this mix. I can actually quickly do that. But I know Boykin's played a lot less, so his production, and he's also been in the league less. So they're 2 things to think about when we quickly look at Boykin. Boykin AV of 6. He's had a lot less receptions. That wasn't worth doing. But Laquan Treadwell was probably the weaker candidate in this list. When you look at Kenny Golladay, he's probably the top candidate. Rashad Higgins also makes a lot of sense. The thing that I do like, though, about Kenny Golladay as well is he's the younger guy of all of this. So you get him, let's say you got him on a 2 or 3 year deal at like 4.5 per, you'd be pretty happy with that. you'd be pretty happy with that. And if we look at free agency right now in terms of what wide receivers getting, remember, this has not been the market for wide receivers. We'll just load that up here now. Wide receiver. When you look at the 2023 team, so we got Anthony Miller's obviously low with 1 million. Juju signed an 8.5 deal. If you get Kenny Golladay for 5, you'd be pretty up with that. DJ Chalk signed for 5. Thielen signed for 8. Lazard 11. Hardman 4.5. Yeah, so maybe you need to probably spend 5 or 6 on Kenny Golladay, but you could set up a void year. You could back end it. It depends, because the safeties we talked about, they're only going to get 1.8 to 2 million max. The Steelers can find this money if they want to find it as well, with different cuts of like Witherspoon and Gunnar Olszewski. That gives you about 5 million. There's still guys they can still restructure. TJ as well. There's a couple more moves they can make. So don't put it out of the question with Kenny Golladay, and imagine him Kenny to Kenny would be pretty cool as well. And I think he would actually do quite well potentially in this offense. But some of you might be sitting out there and saying it's not worth the money because Pat Freeman's our third wide receiver. Then I think of Rashad Higgins is definitely someone that you might want to look at. But it'll be interesting to see what the Steelers do. They might wait to touch this position, particularly in the third wide receiver, till after the draft and see how it all flows out. They might go, no, we're happy to take the punt, particularly if they draft on the fact that it'll all work out with what we've got in the room, particularly if they draft a decent receiving tight end in the first 3 to 4 rounds. That might be very much the case. But it's going to be a case of wait, watch, and see. But I just wanted to come to you guys, Steeler Nation, with a couple of key free agent targets on the strong safety side, on the third wide receiver options that I think the Steelers should consider. And I hope you have a great week. As always, go Steelers.